I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
So help me God.
His election is historic.
It will be smart bipartisan actions that help us finish the fight.
There is nothing that we cannot achieve.
This is a referendum for us to start working together.
Rebuilding trust will be central to our focus in the White House.
Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Washington Post Live. I'm Jacqueline Alemany, author of the Power Up newsletter at the Washington Post. My guest today is Indiana Republican Senator Todd Young, who was elected to his first term in the U.S. Senate in 2016 after serving 3 terms in the House. Along with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Young has reintroduced the Endless Frontier Act, which calls for $100 billion in spending to advance U.S. science and technology innovation. We'll also get his take on the future of the Republican Party. Welcome, Senator Young. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Jackie. Good to have you.
I want to just get into the Endless Frontier Act. Again, it calls for $100 billion in spending to help shore up U.S. and technology innovation. Can you walk us through this bill and why you've reintroduced it and why we need it now?
Sure. The Endless Frontier Act is an initiative in response to China's very significant investments in research and development and sort of cutting edge 21st century technologies, things like artificial intelligence and quantum computing, genomics, the very platforms that will be able to build sectors of the economy on top of in the future. The United States of America historically has been very good, especially post-World War II, in investing in sort of the research and development science enterprise. But we've decreased our level of investment in recent decades. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party has significantly increased their investment. So if we're going to outgrow, out-innovate, and ultimately outcompete the Chinese Communist Party and ensure that our values prevail and are defended as our allies and partners in the 21st century, then it's essential that we invest in these areas. And so that's why we've reintroduced this legislation.
Are we further behind China in science and technology innovation than we were 4 years ago before the start of the Trump administration?
We are. There's a real opportunity cost to waiting. We introduced this piece of legislation just last year, and even over that time period, we've seen significant investments by the Chinese Communist Party in things like artificial intelligence. So we just can't wait any longer. And in the midst of this global pandemic, there's also a diplomatic imperative to acting. The Chinese have been amplifying a message around the world, carrying it to many of the recipient countries of their Belt and Road Initiative investments, that the United States is divided on so many fronts. And of course, that's true. We are divided politically and civically, and we're going through a rough patch in our public life, but we've been here before. We don't want to fixate on that. We can demonstrate collectively through our elected officials and through the administration that we are unified when it comes to national security and defending our values. We are unified when it comes to competing and outpacing the Chinese Communist Party by passing this Endless Frontier Act.
A new version of the bill, however, has yet to be introduced. You had told reporters last week that some of your colleagues needed to grow more comfortable with the text. What are their hesitations?
Well, I wouldn't characterize them as hesitations. I'm actually incredibly encouraged by the level of engagement we've seen from my colleagues. Not only are members of the press like you and so many others beginning to cover this in an incredibly deep way and broad fashion, but we're gaining a lot of interest from my colleagues, and therefore they are drafting up amendments. There are additional things that they would like to add to this legislation, or perhaps amend as we work our way through so-called regular order, through the regular committee process. And back to getting the bipartisan buy-in, this is how you do it. You crowd in as many good ideas as you can. You push aside pride of authorship so that you end up with the best possible work product. And then hopefully you get 70, 75 or more bipartisan votes in the end. And I think that's the way we can send the most powerful message to the Chinese Communist Party that we are indeed unified. That's why Senator Schumer, I, and other leaders on the Republican and Democratic side thought it was a good idea to hit pause so that others have an opportunity to meaningfully contribute to this process.
Do you know yet what changes need to be made to the text in order to push this through the House and the Senate?
We're waiting on all the amendments, so I wouldn't want to highlight some to the disadvantage of others, but all of this will be aired through the regular order or public committee process, which is really how the Senate is supposed to work. It's not how it worked with respect to the $1.9 trillion package that we began this administration with. It's not how it may work on infrastructure broadly defined, but it's how we intend to make things work as it relates to confronting the Chinese Communist Party and ensuring that we are equipped with the best tools. So there are war fighters never have to fight a fair fight. So there are diplomats have maximal leverage. And so that the American people, their power, their talents, their dynamism, their creativity can be harnessed in this whole of society effort to ensure, just as we did during the Cold War, that Western values of freedom and opportunity and agency among rank and file citizens prevails over the state capitalist model of the Chinese Communist Party, which I have to say, right now, that's a stable model. The communist authoritarian model, at least on the surface, seems stable to a lot of elites and to a number of government leaders around the world. And so we mustn't diminish or overlook the attractiveness of that model, which is why it's really important for the United States to project strength and unity as it relates to this matter.
The attractiveness of the communist model, from what sort of perspective are you referring to?
Well, let's say you're an elite in Burma. Or let's say you are a military leader in Burma. You might find the techno-authoritarian model that the Chinese Communist Party is perfecting, the in-a-box model that they're exporting to other countries through their technology and their surveillance state, to be attractive because it allows the so-called communists, in reality, they're fascists, worried about their own power and not the individuals who they should be representing and protecting, which is the broader populace. But you might find that stability popular. It allows you to send your children to elite schools in the United States and other countries. It allows you to get a disproportionate benefit from the labor of your citizens. It allows dissent to be quelled of any corrupt business practices that you may be involved in. These are all horrible things, of course, but it doesn't mean that they're not appealing to people. So we need to provide a competing model, just as we did during the Cold War, grounded in universal rights. This is what this country was founded on, of course, and freedom and the things I mentioned before, opportunity to rise up the economic ladder, to start a family, to land a meaningful vocation, and to be equal in your citizenship with your fellow citizens. And this is what the Republican Party should stand for moving forward. And this is what the Endless Frontier Act will help facilitate through these critical federal investments, just as we invested in the wake of Sputnik and in the space race, and we're able to win that, just as we invested in the interstate highway system. We can be very good at making these strategic bets. And this is the purpose of the Endless Frontier Act.
And former President Trump consistently proposed and made cuts to science and technology investments, R&D spending. Do you believe that was a mistake over the course of his presidency?
We've seen successive administrations decrease the level of investment Republican and Democrat over the years. And much of that has to do with the belief that in this globalized, highly commercialized environment we live in, the private sector will take up the slack. But we also know that there are public benefits to investment. We've seen this historically through the creation of the internet. Originally, it was the handiwork and tinkering and brainchild of DARPA, a defense agency. We've seen this through various other innovations. In fact, the modern aerospace industry wouldn't really exist. It certainly wouldn't be located centrally in the United States of America, but for President Eisenhower's leadership and standing up NASA, followed by President Kennedy's leadership in deciding to walk point and engage in a space race, put a person on the moon. Now we see, after an investment of roughly $140 billion in the space race, an industry that leads to $2.3 trillion worth of GDP contribution. This is a proven model and one that just needs updating for the 21st century. And that's why I am really encouraged to see the bipartisan support for it. 14 original co-sponsors, and you'll see those numbers grow as it works its way through the process.
And I just want to state for the record that President Obama actually did increase spending and the budget for R&D. But before we get to some audience questions, I want to get to a provision in the bill that has received some criticism.
As a percentage of GDP, I think over the years we've seen a decrease in the amount of research and development. But regardless, one area where we have not seen an increase in R&D has been in the physical sciences. We've done very well as it relates to basic research. But when it comes to the physical sciences, things like robotics and advanced manufacturing and artificial intelligence and other areas, this is where the Chinese are clearly outclassing us. And it's where the United States has historically been done a better job, and we need to up our game.
And this provision in the bill that provides $10 billion to invest in tech startups in various regions around the country. Some critics have pointed to past difficulties in trying to establish these hubs through government spending, arguing it's much more common for them to rise organically. Why do you think these investments are going to work now?
Well, because we have so much untapped potential throughout the country. We are an information-driven, knowledge-driven economy. Sweat doesn't pay what it used to, and the return on education and social capital are incredibly high. So we have underappreciated that in recent decades with the convergence of globalization. The scale of the economy has led to outsized benefits for those who grow up in a zip code where they're afforded a strong educational environment and a lot of social capital. Automation has disrupted the lives and vocations of a lot of individuals, and urbanization has led to the depopulation of many of our geographies. And as people move into the cities where so many of the larger enterprises are located, that means in the end, through the convergence of this amalgam of forces, we have a number of people who aren't, you might say, fully in the game. People whose talents aren't being harnessed, that don't live on the coast, that don't live in major metropolitan areas like New York or the Silicon Valley or Austin or the Research Triangle in North Carolina. And we need to harness that talent. So the tech hubs are designed to take existing areas of expertise. In the state of Indiana, it might be genomics or advanced manufacturing or autonomous vehicles, all of which we have expertise in, our universities as well as the private sector, and provide some seed investment there, which in turn, as we saw in Silicon Valley and the Research Triangle and in Boston, will lead to more venture capital coming into the area, harnessing more talent. And each of these tech hubs, if well implemented, and that's always the key, Manufacturing USA most recently was a very well implemented hub concept. But if well implemented, we'll see generations of talent that is able to cycle through these tech hub locations and ensure that we're firing in all cylinders as a country so that, once again, we can out-innovate and out-compete the Chinese Communist Party.
And Senator Young, I want to throw you a question from the audience. We have Mark Palmer from Alabama who wants to know what needs to be done outside of the formal education system to help prepare grade school children for employment in these critical industries.
Well, Mark, thank you for the question. It's a key question. The Endless Frontier Act invests in post K through 12 educational expertise. So everything from the community college trained technologists that will be needed to help build artificial intelligence platforms to the postdoctoral level that will be needed to take robotics to the cutting edge of technology. But K through 12, as someone with 4 children, I understand, is really foundational. And I think we need more flexibility at the state level and at the local level. That can mean charter schools. And we've had great success with the charter school movement in Indiana. Whenever you begin talking about school choice, it creates a measure of controversy. But I do think that competition leads to better schooling in those schools that might receive so-called vouchers or Pell Grants for K through 12 students. And I also think we need more stimulation, not K through 12, but in the pre-K space when brains are really developing. Not every parent has the benefit that I had of one working parent and the other who is both able and wants to stay at home. To bond with a young child and is able to stimulate the child's brain at its most critical developmental stages. And we need to make sure that there's sufficient opportunity, high quality daycare or pre-K opportunities for our youngest children, because in the end, that is a national security issue that helps us dominate these technology areas as the Endless Frontier Act advocates. So this is a critical piece of it, Mark.
And staying on the topic of China, President Biden met with Xi Jinping and other world leaders last weekend to discuss new climate goals. As countries around the world look to reduce emissions, how will these sorts of green initiatives impact foreign competitiveness?
Well, one of the areas that we identify as potential areas of investment through a new technology directorate we create at the National Science Foundation that will receive applications from universities and other applicants and come up with the best in-class technologies is these advanced energy technologies, whether they're carbon-based technologies or instead zero carbon emission technologies. The U.S. needs to lead the way here again. And we recognize that climate is a global challenge that it transcends borders, so it needs to be dealt with collectively, working with other countries. In parallel with the Endless Frontier Act, there are other committees of jurisdiction like the Foreign Relations Committee, on which I sit, that are developing legislation to deal with China and the national security threat it presents to the American people. And on foreign relations, I've inserted some legislation in there with Senator Mark Warner that calls for creation of a technology consortium of countries that will work together to develop these next-gen technologies. We'll crowd in their funding, we'll crowd in their technological expertise, we'll ring-fence the intellectual property where necessary. But this, of course, would include in the area of advanced energy technology, because all these countries understand that doing nothing is just, it's not an option.
And this is not the first time that you've gone after China. Last year with Senator Mitt Romney and other of your peers, you introduced a Chinese sanctions bill called the Strategic Act. You said that the Communist Party has tested the U.S. unlike any other that we faced as a country. What is your reaction to China's takeover of Hong Kong and their persecution of the Uyghurs?
Well, in addition to our people, from a geopolitical standpoint, our greatest asset as a country is our value system. And we need to continue to hold up the lamp of liberty very brightly. We need to use this strategic competition as an opportunity, as we did during the Cold War, to become a better version of ourselves, to live up to our own national narratives of freedom and opportunity and equality. And we need to call out by name and consistently call out the Chinese Communist Party and other offenders of those rights, standing up for the rights and the dignity of all people. Now, we shouldn't be unrealistic. We need to be sober-minded and understand that it takes a number of years, oftentimes generations, to bring regions and countries into positions of what I would regard as a position of better behavior. But we do need to offer encouragement to those dissidents who speak out. As it relates to Hong Kong specifically, I've met with some of the brave dissidents. I've met with their leadership here in Washington, D.C. I was the first United States senator to speak at one of their rallies as things really began to heat up in the last couple of years and the Chinese began to crack down on dissidents. I'll continue to speak out forcefully. I think that's part of our obligation as elected officials.
And do you think that the U.S. should boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics over the Chinese Communist Party's treatment of the Uyghurs?
I actually think that Senator Romney had an excellent idea, which was a so-called diplomatic boycott. I have to admit I was unfamiliar with the concept previously, but that would just mean government officials like myself, like members of the administration, should agree not to attend the games, signaling that we highly disapprove, we abhor, and we condemn the slavery conditions in which they require Uyghur Muslims to work. We condemn the executions and forced abortions that they're involved in. We condemn the snatching of territory and the occupation of disputed lands, on and on and on. And I think that would be an appropriate response. And then I think we need to go and defeat the communist Chinese in every conceivable area that we can, knowing that they dope their athletes and they'll be cheating every step of the way, just as they cheat when it relates to matters of economics.
And I want to get to the topic of this infrastructure bill that we're going to be hearing a lot of from President Biden himself this week. Republicans just issued their counter proposal of $506 billion, obviously much lower than what President Biden proposed, which was a $2.25 trillion infrastructure package. Progressive Democrats have pushed for as much as a $10 trillion package in spending. And Democratic Senator Chris Coons says he was open to $800 billion to $1 trillion. Why is there so much variation here between these top line numbers? And what do you support in spending on infrastructure?
There's a lot of variation, candidly, because the administration, and this comes from one of the more bipartisan senators, right? When we can find common ground, I'm going to find it. But they've been picking abstract numbers out of the air. They've been putting a bumper sticker headline on top of it, and then they've been throwing a grab bag of goodies underneath it, some of which are actually consistent with the headline. Many others are not. By President Biden's own definition. You used the World Economic Forum's definition for infrastructure recently when asked what he thinks constitutes infrastructure. And his answer, in short, was energy and transportation and the internet. Well, that comprised 37% of the $2.5 trillion package, which takes you to about where Republicans are. We instead, with the leadership of my colleague, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and some of my other colleagues, we've come up with a sharpened pencil, more precise figure. And we want to work as we have traditionally worked to get infrastructure done. I will indicate that the package that Republicans have put forward was two times roughly, what was passed during you mentioned President Obama earlier, during the Obama years. So this is an incredibly robust infrastructure package. And one doesn't want to become desensitized to the amount of money that we are spending. We can invest robustly, and I think we should. But we shouldn't spend this money as though it's never going to have to be paid back.
And the second part of this plan, which the administration is going to be releasing in short order, do you support the American Families Plan?
Well, here again, I support some of the initiatives. I mentioned who wouldn't support American families, first of all, right? Some of these bills carry names that invite popular support when you just look at the headline name. But I support investment in our nation's children. I support investment in our nation's seniors. If I recall, these are among the categories of investment that the Biden administration supports investing in. I support housing affordability, but I've come up with creative ways to fund many of these things. I've come up with cost-effective ways to make these investments. I've received no consultation. Instead, we've seen a nice round $2.5 trillion figure thrown out, and we're even told that should we come to a bipartisan agreement on traditional infrastructure, some of the things I mentioned earlier, we're still going to get a $2.5 trillion infrastructure package and then probably a follow-on multi-trillion-dollar package. So, President Biden is evidently not asserting himself quite a bit as the left flank of his party pressures him to support, you mentioned $10 trillion worth of investments. And I wish he would assert himself more. He's always been a person of seemingly strong opinions.
I'm wondering, though, I spoke with a Democratic pollster and with a Republican pollster who echoed her sentiments that female voters in particular don't necessarily see a distinction between soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure and are really just have been hit so hard by the pandemic that they are in favor of these soft infrastructure spending, regardless of what the government is calling it. Are you worried that if Republicans don't get behind the American Families Act, that it's going to maybe widen the gender gap going into 2022 and cause the Republican Party to lose more female voters, some of which are, Trump supporters who have?
No, I'm not. I'm not at all. In fact, I just indicated that I support so many of these things and have developed specific, thoughtful solutions as it relates to investing in these areas. And I think it would be insulting to many females to suggest that they wanted to be profligate in our investments towards these things. They want bold investment, according to the polling. But if they learned that there was a smarter, better, more effective, more targeted way to make these investments, women would of course choose that option over a more expensive, less thoughtful option. So we just need to continue to communicate that we support so many of these priorities, make principled arguments when we can get the microphone, as you've given me a platform here, to demonstrate that support. And then where given the opportunity to work with Democrats, put forward those better proposals, as we're doing through the Endless Frontier Act, through a process that allows for multiple amendments, that invites members of both parties to present their best ideas, to sand and polish proposals so that we get it right for the American people, setting aside ideology, setting aside party affiliation and political gamesmanship, and ultimately advancing what is the quintessentially American approach, which is a pragmatic and apolitical, nonpartisan approach.
We only have time for one more question, unfortunately, but I've got to ask you, how do you think that former President Trump has changed the Republican Party, and would you support him again if he runs for president in 2024?
Well, he's going to have to make a decision about his run in 2024, but I commend the Republican leadership and President Trump over the last 4 years for elevating issues that really were not top of mind for a lot of individuals going into the 2016 election cycle, but now they're foremost on our mind. For example, and I mentioned some of these forces earlier, urbanization converging with automation and globalization. This has fundamentally disrupted the lives of individuals, rank and file, regular people who are not to be written off as baskets of deplorables, who should not be accused of temporary fits of populism, but underlying their grievances and their anxieties and their concerns and challenges are the failure of our institutions, from media to higher ed to our largest business enterprises to government at every level to actually deal with these different issues. President Trump elevated the fact that China had been ripping off our intellectual property. President Trump elevated the issue that we have too many judges that misunderstand their role and think they're legislators. And President Trump advanced and got put into place a number of policies that led to economic gains for all Americans across different income groups and geographies. But now we need to write the next chapter of thoughtful solutions, of investing in those rank and file individuals who have historically made America great, of unleashing their imprisoned lightning so that we can become a better version of ourselves, defeat China, and win the 21st century.
Senator Todd Young, thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Thank you, Jackie.
And coming up this afternoon at 5 p.m., fresh off of his Oscar win, is Jon Batiste, the musician, artist, and activist who's part of the trio who won an Oscar for the score of the animated film Soul. That's at 5 p.m. And later this week, we've got Cindy McCain and the CEO of United Airlines. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We'll see you all later.